guess I just watched teenagers and younger kids doing TED Talks when I was little, and I just soak everything up. I'll just listen to anything and everything. And I guess I just thought it would be really amazing because I knew I was already passionate about sexism, and it would be such an amazing experience to do TED Talk. But yeah.
Welcome to Justice Matters, the podcast inspiring a world where everyone belongs. I'm your host, Tim Buxton.
Well, it's that time again for another episode of Justice Matters, and this time it was in the studio, and sitting across from me yesterday was the exceptional young Isla Freer at just 13 years of age, my youngest guest on the podcast, but also someone who I met 3 weeks ago and performed or gave a speech, a TED Talk at 13 years of old. She's just in grade 8, and she talked about the important issue of sexism and gender equality. We dig into that today in this podcast with her. Wise beyond her years, that's for sure, but she's also living her dreams and pursuing them passionately. She wants to be a screenwriter one day, and we just have a hoot of a time. You will most definitely be inspired after you listen to this podcast. But right from the top, I want to also mention a couple extra things. One, I want to thank all our Patreons. Usually at the end of each of my episodes, I do thank all the Patreons for those of you that jump on and support this podcast to make it actually able to run. Thank you so much for your support, and there's ways that you can do that by going to justicematters.patreon.com, and you guys can jump and be a part of supporting and making this podcast continue to happen. We're getting to the business end of the year, the fun end of the year. Thanksgiving is almost upon us. We've only got a few more episodes left for season 2 to round out, and I can't wait to release the next few episodes. And we've got a real special episode that's going to be dropping on Human Rights Day. That's December 10th. An exciting live podcast that we will be doing with some friends from around the world. It's going to be phenomenal. There's going to be some exciting news to share as well. So keep an eye out for that, December 10th. It's going to be live streamed on YouTube, and you guys can be a part of really recognizing, I think, one of the most important days in the calendar, where we recognize the incredible injustices that are happening around the world. We open our eyes and we say, you know what? We're not going to stay silent anymore. We're going to do something about it. And there's so many people out there doing great things. And that's one of the things I just love about this podcast, being able to highlight not only the injustices, but also the incredible people out there doing some wonderful things to make this world a better place. Guys, thank you so much for tuning in. Let's get into this episode with Isla Freer. Alrighty. Isla Freer, welcome to the Justice Matters podcast.
Thank you.
I'm so excited. You are not only my youngest guest on the podcast, but you will be my wife's favorite guest on the podcast. The reason being, Isla, is that, we first met just a few weeks ago, right? What were we doing?
We were at TEDx Currumbin.
Yeah, we did a TEDx talk together. Yes, Isla, who's with me today, you're only the ripe young age of 13. So where does that put you in school? What grade in school are you?
I'm in grade 8, but lots of 13-year-olds are in grade 7, but yeah.
Okay. So you're a grade 8er. Man, I can't even think back to grade 8 and could never even consider that I would have done a TEDx talk in grade 8. But hey, Isla, the reason you're my favourite, you'll be my favourites guest is on that night there was about 15 or 16 people presenting. You're the one who smashed it out of the park for my wife, and she said you were her favourite. I can't wait to get into the nitty-gritties, not only a bit about what you spoke about, which is such an important issue of justice in the world, but I really am excited to introduce my audience to the beautiful person that you are, and your mum is here in the studio as well, and it's so exciting to have you on the show. So Isla, you told me before we started that you had written on your bucket list when you were 8 years old to do a TED Talk. Is that true? So not only are you got a passion of music and piano, but tell me about Why would an 8-year-old want to have a TEDx or a TED Talk on their bucket list?
Well, I guess I just watched teenagers and younger kids doing TED Talks when I was little, and I just soak everything up. Like, I'll just listen to anything and everything. And I guess I just thought it would be really amazing because I knew I was already passionate about sexism, and it would be such an amazing experience to do TED Talk. But yeah.
And I think that's a great thing you point up. You know, what you are passionate about is certainly the topic you should pick for your TED Talk. So maybe, I mean, for goodness sake, if my kids were watching TED Talks when they were young, I would be so stoked. I mean, you know, to be getting such an education and to be passionate about learning at such a young age is very inspiring.
Thank you.
But shall we jump right into, you know, the topic you chose, something you're really passionate about, sexism and gender equality?
Sure.
Tell me then, what particularly, how did you craft that speech, or what was it like to pick that topic and think, well, how can I do this in, I think it was like 12 minutes we were given. How did that preparation go?
It was a very long process for sure, but it was very crammed in, to be honest, because I just struggled a lot to get started. And I planned it out, and then I didn't like that plan, and then I rewrote it 4 times, I'm pretty sure.
No way.
Before I was happy with it. And then I had to cut down 6 minutes. It was very stressful, but I just kind of had to figure out what were the 3 main ideas that I thought were really important and kind of inclusive to everyone, so it would interest kind of every type of person.
I love that. I love your train of thought and your thinking in that. I was up first, and I remember backstage seeing you, and you were dressed up in this amazing little outfit with a rugby ball. And I'm like, what on earth is this girl going to be talking about? And after me, you jogged up on stage and you opened it up. Tell us a bit about your talk and what you spoke from and what it was like, and just what were those 3 main ideas that you really wanted people to take away?
So the 3 main ideas were that sexism is actually a neuroscience thing, so it's actually wired into us. It's actually already wired into us. But then I discussed neuroplasticity, and that's the brain's ability to rewire itself and make new connections. And because we're such a developed species, like compared to, I don't know, anything else, we definitely have no excuse to rewire those sexist connections into respectful ones.
Yes.
And I thought that would kind of appeal to the logical, like sciencey people.
Yeah.
And I think it's pretty interesting too.
100%, yeah.
And then I talked about explicit material and the impacts that has on sexism, because I know there's a lot of boys my age and a lot younger, and girls too, but mainly males, who've seen a lot of really pornographic material. And I do believe that this is what's impacting their perception of how you should treat females.
Wow.
And then my 3rd topic was my personal experiences. So being catcalled at school and not just catcalled, but having really, really intense and specific comments said to my friends and I quite often, and like it's happened to a lot of girls. And I kind of wanted to talk about how, the invisible man, that's what it's called. Yeah. And how it's now boys and men turn. Yeah. Oh, that was really bad English, but
no.
It's now the male's turn to stand up for us, because we've stood up for ourselves for so long already.
Come on.
And kind of I touched on calling in, which is saying to someone, that's a really interesting viewpoint. Tell me why you think that, rather than being like, that's the wrong thing. Because it allows them to grow and things like that. But I kind of just, that's pretty much it.
Do you know how many times I've quoted you to other people about the calling in rather than calling out? Like dozens of times since your talk. It's had such an impact. And there's other ways I'd like to tell you how you've had an impact on me and my family. It kind of reminds me of Dr. Martin Luther King, where he said, I have a dream, right? And he called people in. Is that what you mentioned and talked about? on the podcast? On the TED Talk, did you mention Dr. Martin Luther King in your talk?
No, I actually didn't. I didn't know that he was kind of ahead for calling in, but
Yeah.
I quoted Loretta J. Ross because she has a TED Talk on calling in, calling on, and calling out.
Wow. So plug for that one if you want to do some. First, go listen to, what's your TED Talk called?
The Invisible Man.
The Invisible Man by Isla Freer. But yeah, like that idea of calling in is so powerful, and the way you reframe
really
a question so that people don't get their backs up and all defensive, right?
Because that doesn't allow them to grow whatsoever. They won't listen to you after that.
You have a dream, and that's the thing about what you talked about. I remember you talked about, I'm a dreamer and I'm going after this dream. You're like Dr. Martin Luther King. He said, I have a dream, and he invited people into that beautiful new story, that new dream of a world that could exist. And you're doing just that. So inspiring. You know, another way you helped me, Isla, my kids are 11. Well, in January, my daughter will be 11. No, she'll be 12. Oh, my goodness. This is scary. 10. My son is 10. And I have a 7-year-old and I have a 3-year-old. So, yes, I'm crazy for having 4 beautiful, crazy kids. But they are so amazing. Each one of them is so different. But they're getting taught now at school about, you know, the birds and the bees talk and some of those things. And I was like, hang on. I want to talk to my children before they find out from the internet, from school, from their friends who've probably got, exposed to things. Yeah. And so I started having conversations. My wife has already had plenty of conversations with our eldest daughter, but I started having conversations, even though he's only 9 or 10 years old, started having conversations with him. And he has been so open to me and chatting with me about this stuff. And something I, as a parent, was really afraid or concerned, like, what's the right way? How do I do this? Now I'm, like, broaching this stuff with him. And it's like, because of your important message in your talk saying, hey, we got to be on the front foot. Kids are being exposed to this. So do you want to talk a bit more about how kids are being exposed to this? I mean, like you said, you're the one with lived experience. You're the one who's in school and facing it. Can you share a bit about why it's so important that we address this issue for kids at a young age?
Yeah, so I've had boys come up to my friends and I and, like, say really, really, really sexual and really specific stuff to us. And they all kind of laugh and think it's a joke, but I don't know whether they understand how severe they're being or whether they are understanding and they think that's okay. And I know for sure it's definitely because of kind of the availability and how easy it is to access pornography, because you can just search it up and there's no website blocks for them, really. Like, you can click on a pop-up and that's not going to stop you from seeing stuff.
I mean, you can just stumble across it. I mean, it's almost designed to put, you type a word wrong, that's designed for things to come up, and even a young kid who's inadvertently exposed to it without realising it. My kids do more work on their iPads at home than they do on anything else. It's kind of scary. Wow. I mean, that's such an important point that you raised. I mean, it's not okay, and to make them, whether they're aware of it or not, to think that it's actually okay needs to be addressed. Yeah. So the invisible man. So you're talking about the invisible man need to rise up. It's the male's turn to rise up. What are some of the ways you think men can do that? If we're the ones now that are called to bring that change?
So definitely in a social situation, if a derogatory or sexualized comment is made towards a female counterpart, definitely the invisible men should become visible by calling the person in, whether that's in front of everyone or, like, personally later on. And probably being actively supportive of equality. Yeah. So we need more male role models in the media and things like that, because I can't, off the top of my head, I can't think of any gender equality based male role models in our society today.
Wow. That's so sad, Isla.
Yeah.
Great point. So I love the way you said, hey, when appropriate, call people in. So whether it's individual on the side, really good.
Mm-hmm.
That's a really good.
That's a really, really good technique.
A really good technique. And you talk a lot more about it in your talk. And with the, what was her name?
Loretta J. Ross.
Loretta J. Ross.
Yep.
So check that one out again. Male role models standing up. It's time for the men to stand up. It's time for the men to not be afraid to stand up. You know, there's a gender-based non-profit called White Ribbon. I'm sure you may or may not have heard about it. And it was about, supporting, standing up for women that are victims of gender-based violence. And I did actually interview the new CEO of that organisation, who is actually a male. Isn't that
That's
great?
That's really cool. So people should know that.
Yeah.
That's not common knowledge. It should be.
So Brad Chilcott, right, is now the CEO. The fact that a woman's, a gender-based violence kind of, charity that's, out there, advocating and protecting particularly women because they are most vulnerable, is led now by a guy named Brad Chilcott, who's done great things. So that's a kind of a bit of a plug for a previous episode where I talked with him. But we need more people like that.
Yeah.
It can't just be 13-year-old Isla Freer who's brave enough to get on a TEDx stage and talk about this stuff that most people wouldn't want to touch with a bar of soap. You are leading the way. And I hope that there's many more people coming behind you to follow you. Isla, I'm sure you don't spend all your time researching gender-based sexism and violence. Tell us a bit about some of the other things that you're passionate about and some of the other things that you love, because you do talk about that in your talk as well.
Yeah, so I just finished the soccer season, my first year playing soccer, and that's so fun. I love soccer.
So good.
As you mentioned earlier, I do piano, but I also songwrite and things like that.
Mm.
And I really love not screenwriting, but writing in general, and I dream to become a screenwriter.
You dream to become a screenwriter?
Yes.
Oh, amazing. I couldn't even imagine, like, half the things that you've done and that you're dreaming about. I didn't even cross my mind when I was a kid. I think all I ever wanted to be was like an AFL player. Speaking of which, soccer, you said one of the things that grosses you out are men that wear tight football pants. Is that right?
Short shorts.
No
one needs to see guy thighs. That's just, I'm sorry. I'm not being sexist there, but it's just insane.
That's so funny. I love that. I came up from Adelaide, where, AFL is the predominant sport up to Queensland, and that was always the joke. The Aussie rules players love their shorts nice and tight. I'm glad, thankfully, guys like Eddie Betts, who's a hero of mine, like bucked the trend with his daggy shorts, which almost looked like they were falling off half the time. But anyways, wow. So writing music, have you got some recent stuff out there?
I haven't got anything out there. I mean, I've posted a little video of something, but I'm not super happy with it. But
okay.
Yeah.
But you know what? It all starts getting one or two songs going, and then you just keep it rolling. So you sound like a hard critic of yourself. I mean, to have written that TED Talk like several times and not be happy, I think you're doing all right. Don't be too hard. Isla. So much fun to have you in the studio, but you've also been on another podcast. It sounds like you're on the podcast round. Tell us about your most recent podcast you were on.
So my most recent and first podcast I did with Kimberly Spencer.
Yeah.
And that's called Princess and the Bee. I actually am pretty sure it got released yesterday, but I haven't really had the time to respond to it because so much study. But
yeah, you're getting to the end of the school year, right?
Yeah.
And oof. So grade 9,
when I left, see, I finished school in the late 1900s. Get that? 1999, I graduated. So I like to say the late 1900s to my children. But anyways, so grade 8 going into grade 9, is that that was the first year of high school for me. Is it like middle school for you, or is it high school still, or is it, I don't know. Educate me, Isla.
So they kind of say year 7 and 8 is middle school, but
Okay.
I'm still in like a high school.
Okay.
So 7, 8 is middle school. Year 9's kind of just separate, and then 10, 11, 12 is senior school.
Okay. It seems like every school's different these days, but and that's a really important thing. So you're finishing your middle school.
Yep.
Exam time. You're feeling confident?
Kind of. I'll do all right. I just need to study a bit more on science and maths because they're a bit dodgy, but...
Yeah. So, this podcast is called Justice Matters, and they're probably, down through the ages, fighting for the rights of women throughout the ages, the fact that, women couldn't vote, the fact that women couldn't own property, the fact that women don't get the, fair treatment in workplaces. And I love it when there's sports like the World Surfing League that actually said, you know what, we're going to equalise pay for men and female
that's really amazing.
athletes. What are some other things that you would like to see change in your lifetime? I mean, we shouldn't have to wait so long for these things to change. Is there anything that comes to mind that you would like to see change?
Honestly, the whole political system, I think, needs to completely change. I think we need really young people, like really, really early adults who have an absolutely fresh perspective, middle-aged people and really, really elderly people who've got lots of life experience. And we need even spread of all genders and ethnicities, religions and nationalities that reflect Australia as a whole rather than just like a tiny bit of diversity.
Yeah.
But yeah, that would be amazing if that could happen.
I love that you went straight for the political arena because that's where the decisions are made, right? And I heard a saying, the fish rots at the head first, right? In other words, it's the leaders, it's at the head at the top where there's often the most problems and where there's rot, where there's issues that need to be dealt with. And I think having equal representation, having fair representation and addressing the political system is a huge issue that needs to be faced. So you're on it. I have to say, I don't want this podcast to end. Do you have any questions for me, Isla?
Well, I actually haven't had the chance to listen to your podcast, your TED Talk, and I was getting ready when you were speaking. So what did you actually talk about?
I talked about, thank you so much. I know, like when this is released, both our TED Talks will be out there in the world for everyone to see. I spoke about my time living in northern Iraq. I lived my family there when we were held. My daughter was 3, my eldest was 3. My wife corrected me. My son was 1 and we had a 9-week-old. When we moved to Iraq to work with so an organisation that was helping at-risk